Welcome to the mysterious world of Paranormal M. Prepare to be spellbound by our tales of the unexplained. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated on our latest mind-bending revelations. Banshee visits in Irish countryside. We lived in a bungalow in the Midlands. I had my own room, box room, nothing fancy, with like a bunk bed up against the wall, to the right of the door and the window on the far left side of the opposite wall. These bits are relevant. I'll explain in a bit. One night in August of 2000, I was 8. Would have been late in the night, and I woke up and looked out the window. From what I know now, it was the Banshee. Some people might be dubious. They have their own options and opinions, but from what I saw, it corresponds to previous accounts. My granddad, maybe grandma or grandpa, had a similar one out by Sandy Mount. The Banshee was like a fluorescent yellow, brushing its hair and floating. That's what got me. Kept coming toward the window. Had its mouth open, flesh missing in parts of the face, and it wore what looked like a dress or a nightdress. Anywho, I saw this coming toward the window and I was stuck, half in amazement and half in fear. Thinking back to it, it felt like I was being beckoned. Some innate feeling of needing to wait. Only when I realized that it was approaching the window did I bawl out for the folks. A few days later, a friend of my parents died, heart attack, on his tractor. We then moved a few years later to my mom's family home. Folks bought it. A few years ago, my dad and myself went into the house, having been out. We both heard someone run from the top of the stairs, across the landing, and toward my folks' room. It was child's footsteps. My brother was only young, but still able to climb the stairs, so we thought, crap, maybe it's him or my younger sister. Turned out they were both still in the car. When we moved into the house initially, my parents told us the story of how one night in the room below them, they heard children singing Ring-a-Ding Rosie. I call it Ring Around the Rosie. And they were laughing. There's been some crazy stuff. Pipe smoke by the old fireplace, flashes of something in the corner of your eye, and our shed. We've got a homemade gym out there, and man, there's something not right about it. I had this feeling of being watched that all of us get when we're out there. My man won't go in at times because of it. I had another encounter last year with what I reckon is the Banshee. We have an old mobile home that we gave to my grandparents years back when they came to stay with us. I use it to study in, when uni exams come around. This time I was out there working away on the laptop with some music playing. I heard some whining and wailing in the background. In fairness, this mobile home isn't the greatest of shape. It's missing a second front door, and we do have cats. The only thing is, this wasn't like the cats wailing, as I've heard them before. It was mournful. As you can expect, the volume went up, and I sat until eventually it just dissipated. The following day, a local man who lives on a hill we can see from the house died. It's funny, I was talking to my sister last week and she reminded me. A few years ago, when I went to the States around July, she remembers waking up one night and looking out of her bedroom door. It's a box room that's quite, continuous with the landing. She looked out and saw this figure, pale white, mouth open, gazing at her from the window next to my bedroom door. Needless to say, she doesn't like the window. Again, a neighbor died the following day. One more and I'll leave you to it. My granddad died in 2006. A few weeks later, I was in the sitting room reading paper when I felt a pinch on my back. Checked the mirror and there were nail marks in the skin. Funny thing was, my granddad used to do it a lot to me as a kid. Plus, we were really close. My home is an 18th century Georgian farmhouse, so it's got the works. My dad told a ghost to fuck off. To give you some background here, I live in a 2-story Georgian farmhouse with an extensive history. The famine, War of Independence, Civil War, etc. The house belonged to a family of my mam's side. They were, from my interpretation of the stories, were middlemen for a landlord. Collect taxes from tenant farmers in the local area that held land. One relative in particular was like an active member of the IRA. Not the group recognized today, but the early group that emerged from the IRB, the Irish Republican Brotherhood. It was this person my dad saw about 2 weeks ago in the sitting room. What happened is, for my dad, he was sitting in the sitting room by the TV, couldn't sleep and was up at about midnight. Saw flashes in the corner of his vision and ignored them. Saw said flashes again, and this time he saw someone walk into the room. They were in a uniform, an IRB uniform. This person walked in and, as he put it, started throwing shapes. Was in some way preparing to fight. He said this person appeared grumpy and unimpressed, almost as though, like, my dad was sitting in this person's seat. So in the way only my dad could, I couldn't stop laughing at this one, even when I heard it twice over. He looked at the person and told them to fuck off. I'm not in that humor. So the person just turned around, walked out of the room. The weird thing was that he said he had this thought of a name, a family member, but wouldn't have known that the person was him, but never saw photos of him previously, and, well, the face was obscured. Only when he described the features, body shape, etc., and saw photos that corresponded to his stature and sort of habitus, did it click. So yeah, my dad told a ghost to, well, heave ho, and the entity responded. Repetitive ticking noise in 300-year-old house. So to get with the problem, it's the recurring ticking noise, like an old desk clock that usually is quite loud, rhythmic, but maintains a similar pattern. The most recent episode was this week past. For 2 days, the first time in the kitchen over the oven hob. So skeptical as I am, I thought it's the oven with its timer. But nope, the oven's timer is an electronic beep. What happened was it began ticking, like lasting 30 seconds, and stopped. I asked it to repeat, and again it began. Repeated this a few times, and sometimes the ticking was barely audible, then flicking back to as loud as a clock parked in front of you. The following day, it bounced back to my room where it originated. As I first heard the noise years back in my room, but again coming from a point over stuff in the room that couldn't quite possibly make a ticking noise if it was there. Interestingly, my brothers heard it over the past few months, so it's not something I alone have heard. I've outruled rain, dodgy gutters, friendly inhabitants in the room, insects, and other benign causes. I've spoken on the forum before about my house. It's a 250 to 300-year-old house in Ireland. My dad's told a ghost out of my mam's uncle in his revolutionary uniform to fuck right off. I've had problems with this ticking before, and it once went on through a night one summer I was home from college. It's followed me when I moved from home for medical placements to other regions in Ireland. Shadows lurking with a new baby at home. We've recently moved home again, due to my work being located in different posts. Gets messy, but this time we've made the most of it. This time round, however, we have a new baby, so all the more tiring a move. Tiring. Upon moving, my mother-in-law and her own man were helping. Their first impression was of a petite house with none of the spirit baggage some houses bring. Within several days, on climbing our rather steep stairs, a quick shadow passing in the mirrors affixed the wall. It's like the last step that caught my attention. It was an odd shadow, as the back door, PVC security type, has like half a glass panel, frozen glass, and it let out a considerable amount of light in. Continuing on as the night settled and our baby adjusted, although 5 a.m. starts aren't for the faint-hearted, I began hearing the stairs creak. This house is an ex-50s block build. The purpose home was for like joists for the next house to transmit sound. The sounds I'd hear were purposeful steps up the stairs, weight shifting until it's reached near the top, and several times it made it to the top till I shone the phone torch out, or made a mad dash to assail whoever was coming near the baby and the boss. As the weeks progressed, I asked my wife what she felt. She's on maternity leave with the baby, so she's here more than I am. To describe, we have a small porch and the opening hallway door. It's like a 3.5 foot by 3.5 foot space. There's a door after that opens into the sitting room. She mentioned that several times she had seen the shadow of a man, bald and broad, several inches taller than myself, in the porch. Just glimpses, but enough to know that she was being watched. I saw some further shadows at the end of our tiny hall, and the noises on the stairs continued. My wife still felt that she was watched from the porch and began to see glimpses elsewhere. So after one night of particularly noisy stairs, I lost it. I decided to just tell whatever was lurking, just to leave us alone. Particularly my wife and baby. It was an angry, non-polite message, but to be honest, well, a little foolish barking into thin air, but in fairness, there wasn't a whole lot else I could do. Seeing her giggle and stare at a certain corner of the room left me decidedly fearful enough that whatever it was, well, we could see it could be interacting with our baby that I wasn't going to have. Since the time I told whatever we had lurking to politely fuck right off, we've had an odd peace in the house. Still feels like something might be here, but the message got through. Come near my baby and I get angry. Ask Reddit. My mom and her 2 sisters, they were all in their early teens and later single-digit ages and used to sleep together in the old house that was about 100 years old, but it was small and semi-sturdy, like wood and clay and a thatched roof. My mom and her next sibling sister both claim they used to regularly see the semi-transparent gray figure, or figures sometimes, slowly come by their beds at night and just hover next to the bed a few feet away. They always could make out that the figure was watching them, but they didn't feel scared or cold or any bad intention there. Apparently, my mom, being the eldest, lost the ability to see them years later, but my aunt could still see the figures for many more years, visiting the bedside at night, just hovering, watching. Years later, that house was demolished. But as was customary, a local shaman, South Indian Hindu custom, He was called in to conduct ceremonies to purify the land before construction of another building on that land. The shaman was very adamant about the presence of our ancestors in the area, that they were watching over us and were happy, but that we still needed to pay respects to them and make sure that we continued to be upstanding. Each family in South India traditionally has a familial demigod or temple of worship that protects one and guides folks through life. So my grandparents sure performed extensive ceremonies and offerings to the demigod. Kind of stopped showing up at night. The figures, that is. To this day, my mom speaks of the times. I think she still feels a bit spooked out by it all. But my aunt, who I feel has heightened sensitivity to energies around her, seemingly always felt safe. Me, personally, I'm a scientific atheist with a strong sense of spirituality, and I feel like there is something about youth and their ability to sense things better than adults. Ask Reddit. My story isn't quite what the title asks, but in late 2002, I was riding along with an uncle of mine. I'm from Texas, spent a few months with a truck-driving uncle of mine out in Missouri. I rode with him carrying a load to Maryland. After a few days or so, we ended up parking near a rest area. It's in Myersville, Maryland. Around 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, I remember having the shit scared out of me. I was asleep in the passenger seat when I was awoke by a very loud sound. As I awoke, I looked behind me toward my uncle, who was just walking as well. Just as I was about to speak, bright light shined in through all the windows. I remember getting an adrenaline rush and reaching for my seatbelt when I heard people screaming not to move from outside the truck. I froze and saw people in black gear and guns saying to leave the truck now. All I remember just after was the truck shaking as SWAT pulled us. The truck pulled us across the street in darkness while not saying shit. Most shocked and afraid I've ever been. Once we were near what looked like a bus bench, we heard a loud bang. Also, there was a frickin' helicopter nearby, which was sounding, well, you could hear it. Couldn't see where because it had no lights on, and long story short, we were sleeping near the Myersville, Maryland rest area where the DC snipers were sleeping. We were interviewed by a guy from the FBI when the sun came up. We were told the person that was the man shooting people on the Beltway was the suspect they arrested in the area. They didn't go into detail, but interviewed everyone there. I remember the blue car they drove being put in a trailer, and we didn't get to leave until 1 p.m. the next day. I also remember a Greyhound type of bus being there. It was full of Orthodox Jews being interviewed as well. Actually, got talked to by a news crew as well. Weird time. And doesn't seem paranormal at all, but kind of interesting. Ask Reddit. I am long overdue to this thread, and not a trucker. But that being said, I was heading east on I-70 after a successful recovery job. I had seen enough of West Coast of America and felt like heading up to the Rockies. I was on my third day of minimal sleep, 2 to 3 hours max, due to aspects of my job. Crossing the mountain pass, I was doing 55 miles an hour with the windows cracked in order for the cold air to keep me awake. At 55 on those roads, I needed to be as awake as I could get myself. I finally managed my way through the twisty parts and hit the flat open stretches of the road. Opened up to about 65 miles an hour. After a while, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, keeping pace with me. I slowed down. It kept pace. I ventured a glance over to the right of my vehicle and saw a loping beast. bright red eyes like highway flare bright red, and a bright blood-red tongue hanging out of its mouth as it loped along behind the vehicle. It even turned and looked at me. As I opened up that aged engine and made 85-90 and just kept on driving until I hit Elko, Nevada. Not another car did I see for hours until I was 2 to 3 miles outside that town. I pulled off the road wearing my Rasputin's rock and roll t-shirt, cut off jeans and my long hair halfway down my back, and carrying a copy of Somerset Maugham's Of Human Bondage. As the waitress and hostess led me to my table, I overheard a couple of locals in the booth discussing. Asshole number 1. Think people that dress like that should be carried out of here. To which asshole number 2 said, yeah, in a body bag. Yuck, yuck. I asked the waitress to give me a table at a better location where I could face the door and aforementioned assholes, and sitting down took a huge sigh of relief. Local assholes were like a kind of a warm welcome after what I saw chasing me down a highway in the middle of a desert in the dead of night. The cherry pie gave me an upset stomach with 3 cups of shitty coffee, but the sun was coming up when I left to keep pushing on. Three music box notes at night. Most nights for the past 2 weeks, I've been woken once a night at various times, but most frequently between 3:20 and 3:30 a.m. by loud, sort of tinny music box notes. Gets my heart racing each time. I don't own a music box. Turned off electronic devices, I pulled out my bed and furniture and looked for anything that could be making the sound, but I can't find any answers. I had posted on my Facebook wall when it first started happening, and we all concluded it must be some kind of auditory hallucination happening. That's when I was half asleep, but the other night I was having trouble sleeping and was wide awake for over an hour tapping away on my phone, and I heard it loud while I was completely awake and alert. And it just happened again tonight while I was awake too. I was trying to think why the 3 notes were familiar, and I think it's the go-to-sleep notes from Brahms' Lullaby, which is ironic. If it's a ghost, it has a sense of humor. The last 2 nights I've had a smart recorder app switched on my phone, the kind that only records if it picks up noise. But it didn't happen. I wasn't awoken, and nothing on the recording. Absolutely kicking myself for forgetting to turn the app on tonight. I'll keep trying. Not the first time weird things have happened in this cottage. Soon after moving in a year and a half ago, the lights in my room would randomly switch on and off. At first, I put it down to electronic fault, but it was odd that it only ever happened at night, waking us up once we were asleep. Daughter often sleeps in my bed. Then after a few weeks, it just stopped on its own. Also had a few literal bumps in the night, like loud and sudden bumps, which we initially reasoned were perhaps the cat knocking something over, but we did later realize the cat's outside. My elderly neighbors convinced her place is haunted and has some wild stories that can't be explained, unless she's either going senile, but she seems sharp as a tack from our conversations, or someone's been breaking in and playing tricks on her. She said the site where we lived was originally a nunnery, then a convent school for a time, and then a hospital, before being converted to accommodation. My grandfather's hitchhiker. It's weighing on my mind. This is something that happened to my grandfather in the late 80s, and I was wondering if anybody's experienced anything remotely similar. This is all word of mouth, by the way. I was born in the early 2000s, so I didn't directly witness this. The story's been screwing with my head for days now. I'd love some answers, though. For context, Granddad used to work in the mines of a Waikato region of New Zealand, and there was a lot of death and raw emotion there, especially in that time period. Mines in general usually don't have the best vibe, but I've been to this one, and it's so incredibly off-putting to be inside of it. It gives me shivers to just think about it. Anyway, at some point, my granddad picked up what's called a hitchhiker. From what my mom's told me, this is an inhuman spirit that attaches to you in order to take something from you. I wasn't alive in the late 80s, so I genuinely don't know if it's true, but there are at least 6 eyewitness accounts that attest to this happening, so I don't necessarily distrust it. I've looked all over Google for ghost-type hitchhiker, but all I can find are urban legends and supposed car spirits. In this case, the entity wanted my grandfather's health and energy. He began to deteriorate physically, getting body pains and significantly more brittle bones and other odd shit. Between doctors and hospitals and specialists, it got to the point where the government would have been making fucking bank had we lived in America. Got to the point where my nana and grandma called in the Maori priestess to help because they had tried literally everything else. For anybody who doesn't know, the indigenous Maori people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, are very spiritual folk. My grandparents believed that Granddad had picked up something from work, which was confirmed by the priest. She came to their house, and the first thing she did was ask my Nana about a necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. Apparently, no matter how hard she tried, Nana could keep that necklace on her body, or rather could never keep the necklace on her body. The clasp would undo itself, which according to the Maori priestess was her grandmother messing around with her from beyond the grave. That's what honestly solidifies my belief in whatever shit show I've been told that happened next. But like, how the fuck do you fake that? She took one look at my grandfather and began to explain the concept of hitchhikers to my family. She knew that something was wrong. Now, I don't know exactly what happens here, but they started a cleansing ritual. She laid my granddad down on the couch, spoke what was assumed to be a Maori prayer, and began making scooping motions with her hands. She was taking handfuls of something from over my grandfather's body and dumping them into the air around her. She continued this for a good 10 or so minutes, and once she was finished, I shit you not, her hands were stained black, as if somebody had smeared soot on them. I know this because there's photos. I'll talk to my mom tomorrow and see if she knows where it went. It was skin-deep pigment, but even after washing her hands, there was still residue. I've mentioned this because as far as I know, my entire maternal family could be lying to me, and I have no idea. I want to know if there's anybody or anyone who would know about hitchhikers or Klingons or anything else that could be similar. Also, if anybody can feasibly justify why the woman's hands turned black would give me some peace of mind. I've known about this for at least 4 years now, but it's just been bothering me because I saw a video the other day of some ghost YouTube channel where there was an entity leaving a trail of black dust. It reminded me of this story. Dargarville, New Zealand. Paranormal experience. My partner and I traveled to New Zealand a few years back. We were living out of a van and tried our best to utilize freedom camping spots on our trip. We arrived in a town called Dargarville. It was a quaint little town that reminded us both of Wild West movies. There was one camping spot which was located on the grounds of an agricultural machinery museum. If you bought tickets to the museum, then camping was free. The staff were really friendly. We were unsure what to do the following day as it was going to be Sunday. Many things to do were shut in New Zealand on Sunday. We were the only people staying on the grounds of the museum. It was dark and the place had a slightly eerie feeling, but I couldn't place my finger on it. We went to sleep and woke up the next day and proceeded to head into town, and to our surprise, everything was open. We looked around the charity shops and we noticed that a lot of the local people stared at us as if we were aliens. Felt very bizarre, and though everybody was polite, we didn't feel wanted or welcome. Upon checking our calendars, we realized that it wasn't Sunday and in fact it was Monday. We lost a whole day somehow. Did time skip forward? We often discuss this and what could have happened and can't find any information about paranormal activity in Dargerville. Humanoid with bark-like skin. I have trouble sleeping sometimes, and when I do, I found it helps if I go for a small walk. Usually I stick to about 15 minutes just to get blood flowing and to collect myself. Today I decided to go for a walk after not being able to sleep. I decided to walk along an abandoned railroad track that's right behind my apartment complex. I've done this before, and usually I go there and end up seeing feral cats, the occasional raccoon or possum. I usually only walk till I hit a few minutes and then turn around and come back. Today was much, much different. I began walking down the tracks in the same direction I always go. Get to the spot I normally turn around and then come back as I've done before. Upon walking back toward my apartment, I noticed I could hear what sounded like footsteps to my left down the brush below the man-made fill that was the railroad tracks. I paused to listen, because a large amount of animals can be identified by the sound that they make when they walk. I noticed, however, when I paused, I could no longer hear the steps, as if whatever I was hearing also paused. So then I began to walk again and almost immediately started to hear the steps, so I paused again. This time the steps continued and sounded bipedal, as if another person who was walking through the brush down below. So I stood there, continued to listen. The steps continued moving, then stopped, at what I'd estimate would be like 30 or so meters from me. I noticed when the steps stopped, however, that whatever the animal was had stopped completely downwind from me, which I thought was odd, and then I heard it start to scale up towards my direction, slowly at first, and then stop again. I kneeled down in the middle of the tracks to try not to silhouette myself and continued to observe. I then gave out a small alert whistle. Big mistake. Which then prompted the animal to pick up its pace. I grabbed some big leaves of gravel, or pieces of gravel as I was unsure of what was quickly approaching me, placed them in my hoodie pocket. I then pulled out all my phone's flashlight and held it out in front of me, and to my absolute horror, only a few short seconds later I heard the creature crash through the last brush. I could then see it with my own eyes, assisted by the flashlight. It was humanoid with some normal person proportions, but its eyes had a slight reflection to them in a bluish color, similar to that of a deer. However, its skin looked like tree bark. I saw no hairs on its head, and where it was standing, I could tell it wasn't a camouflaged person. I locked eye contact with it for I'd say a solid 15 to 20 seconds. Then it immediately stepped back into the brush and stayed there. I continued to stay in my exact spot for a few minutes as I knew what I just witnessed was likely waiting for me to move. After just a brief few minutes, it then began to walk down into the brush below again. I then ran the rest of the way back down the railroad tracks to my apartment, immediately started this post so I could record my encounter as sharply as possible. Does anybody have any ideas on what this could have been, or experienced anything similar? I'm an Army vet with a large amount of time in the woods and grew up hunting and fishing along with exploring a nearby state park my whole life. Never experienced this kind of thing before. Weird activities in my house. My older brother recently moved into a house with his pregnant wife. That was last summer. My younger brother, he's not younger than me, just younger than my older brother. And they moved in with my dad in October. Me and my mom moved in December. The house was made around the 1930s. During those months, we encountered nothing out of the ordinary except for when me and my mom moved in. The baby was safely born in November. During the summer to October, it was just my brother and his wife. Nothing weird. The house has 2 floors plus a basement and a driveway in the back. In December, my sister-in-law's phone wallpaper changed to Tom from Tom and Jerry. He was smoking a fat cigar, otherwise known as a stogie. She left the phone on her bed on the 2nd floor and left for 3 minutes, then came back. Nothing weird. Thought it was just a glitch. Then, in mid-January, when my older brother and his friend were in the basement, there were 3 knocks on the basement back door which leads to the driveway. There was also some movement outside which my brother saw through the glass window. When I heard this, I thought it was the wind. My older brother was shook. He said it was definitely a person or figure. Then, a few days ago, while I was passing my young brother's room, I saw 2 feet on the bed. Thought it was just my brother in his room, but when I went downstairs, as soon as I went, my brother came in the house through the front door and asked, "Weren't you upstairs?" He said, "No, maybe it was a ghost." I was so sure I saw 2 feet that I actually thought he was in his room. I went back upstairs, retraced my steps. Noticed it was just a box. How could a box look like 2 feet? But I didn't have my glasses on, and that could be it. My eyesight's pretty bad, and my mind is probably just playing tricks on me. I also watch a lot of scary movies, and that adds a lot more to my fear. Yesterday we were wondering about the phone wallpaper changing. We all agreed that no one did it. We're all serious people, so no one would actually lie about it. My older brother said that maybe they changed it to Tom smoking a cigar because my dad smokes cigarettes in the back of the house. Not fat ones, just regular ones. Makes sense, but it's just dumb to me. Is this thing toying with us? Is there even a thing that exists? We still haven't told my younger brother about any of that because he's going to stay in the basement after the renovations are done. This all also started when the basement renovations started themselves. My younger brother doesn't want to even go to the 1st floor if there's no one in it, because he's just that scared. Please tell me what you think, and is there something in my house? My grandma's haunted house. This started in around 2008. I was 8 at that time. My grandma had moved into an old house that was built around the late 1950s. It's in California. First glance, it was already creepy. Felt like a scene from The Grudge. She had a 5-member family stay with her, and I'll often visit whenever I can. This particular night, it was about 4 to 5 weeks in. We were having a little family gathering, and my cousin, who was 4, was looking out the backyard sliding door. It was pitch black. She asked my mom's boyfriend, "Who's that guy in the backyard?" We all turned our attention to her and asked who she's talking about, and she described him as a black male behind the bushes in our backyard. My mom's and aunt's boyfriend had went out to check it out, and there's no one there. Eventually, it was just shivering their timbers, literally. So this next story involves my cousin, who's 4 again. My aunt and mom had went out shopping, while we, the kids, were at home watching TV. I remember this particular night very well because it felt like an actual horror movie. Okay, so it was late, like 8 p.m.-ish, and while we were watching TV, we started hearing dishes clattering together, and it repeated. We as kids were scared as fuck. We decided we all would check it out together, and we did. All we see was nothing but the dishes slightly moving. We all ran back and hid underneath the blanket till Mom was back home. When they came, we told them what happened. Blah, blah. 10 minutes go by and we hear my aunt scream. She said when she went to use the bathroom, she's seen her little cousin standing in the bathtub in the dark. She gets out and says, "What?" She'd moved in with her dad afterwards and nothing's happened to her since. Turns out, sadly, a male was shot and killed by police in that backyard. Teleporting/very fast man around rural roads. In parentheses, serious. So I was walking along a fairly rural road late at night, trying to get back to home. As I was walking along, I noticed a man walking just behind me, probably 20 meters. I didn't want to appear weird, so I didn't look back too much, but definitely got a look at the person. Looked to be a fairly tall, if not very well-built man. As I continued to walk, eventually I realized the man was gone. No less than about 5 minutes later, I saw a man standing on the side of the road once more, ahead of me. At this point, I was pretty chilled. I knew it was the same person for sure. Shape and the way he stood, it was him. I, who am about 6 foot tall and a Latin man who can bench 110 kilograms and have great cardio, who plays rugby every second day for reference, I'm not a pushover, but at this point I just kind of wanted out. I decided to run past him as fast as I could. I began to speed up about 15 meters from me. He ran into the foliage on the side of the road at lightning speed. Look, as I read this back, it seems like I'm bragging. I didn't mean to come off like that. I just meant to show that I don't really ever get afraid of people passing me at night. And furthermore, this is not a street. This is a back road used to get to another small town. There's no reason for anybody to be on the road, let alone at night. I'm the only person to my knowledge to ever be in this area. I'm just looking for an answer so I can go back without soiling my pants. Since what I saw, I've gone back there with a machete, but ended up leaving as twilight hit. Me and my friends heard knocking, yet nothing was there. Me, a male 18, and my 3 friends, male 17, we were hanging out, and we had been in my friend's bedroom for a few hours whilst his mom was asleep. We were being quite noisy and heard 2 knocks on what seemed like his wooden bedroom door. My friend, the host, first called out and heard nothing. He then left to go to investigate. Thinking it was his mom asking him to be quiet, he found nothing. His bedroom was downstairs, so this is quite strange. He turned on all the lights in every room and saw nothing or nobody. The only thing he found his back door was unlocked. There was no sign of an entrance, though. We were all very confused, knocking all around his bedroom, yet found no true replication of the original knock. The one abnormality is my other friend heard 3 knocks, while we only heard 2, which he insinuates were quite deep and not a very wooden sound. We're all extremely concerned by this, as me and my friends the host have seen and felt things throughout his house, which is somewhat old, around the 1940s. So much so as to where the host has experienced sleep paralysis and an evil aura. If anyone knows the meaning behind the 2 random knocks or what it was, please tell me. Please inform me as to why my friend heard 3 deep knocks. A Silent Hill. The year was 2014. It was a fine morning at my workplace somewhere in Nagaland with the beautiful scenery of mountains. We were situated at the top of hills along a new setting army camp. I was posted there as a site engineer, and a Nepali boy named Ramesh, name not revealed, was a cook cum caretaker of the site. Don't know what that means. So he received me with a welcome and began to show my room near the site, where he also had his room attached with the kitchen. Since the place was in a rural area, the houses were made of roof sheets made of tin, with plyboards fixed to the interior and plastic sheets as ceiling. Because during nighttime, water drops and they fall inside the house due to the sweating of the tins. The place was very cold with less sunlight and warmth. It's very difficult for someone like me to survive that cold, followed by precipitation every 10 minutes. You can imagine how much freezing it could be. So Ramesh would collect money from me. And every evening, for the ration and vegetables to cook during the night, during the day, we used to eat in the army canteen with free cost, which was allowed for us by our company, and they were paying for our day meals. Now Ramesh had an urge to eat fish, so he said he was good in cooking fish. So we both went outside the gate, and there was 2 crossroads, and between was the market where a fisherman sit always, but no one was buying from him. He was sitting still. I said to Ramesh, let us buy from him. So he has no customers. Ramesh argued with me, saying and showing he is the super senior than me, and he was there a month or so before I arrived. I couldn't figure it out, his rude behavior towards me, and why was he angry when I showed him the fisherman. I told him, okay, do whatever he want to do, since it was his section to look out. I escaped from there and went to buy a cigarette pack crossing that fisherman's place, and while smoking, I looked at that fisherman. He was holding a doll by his side as he was waiting to deliver it to someone special. Maybe his daughter, I guess. I walked near him with a soft tone and asked him, how much for the fish? He was in another dimension, didn't hear me, and I noticed his pupils are dilated as if he's dead from the inside. I was scared, but asked him again, are you here to sell fish? After a pause, he responded, the fish are already sold. I said, wow, I didn't see anybody near whom he sold his fish. Then Ramesh appeared from my back, and he said, what are you doing here? He had an anger in his face. Things began to escalate quickly because he insulted me once before with a heavy tone, and I replied, it's none of your business. Just do your work. He said again, you're not supposed to talk to him, stuff like that. I was like scolding him, saying, what the fuck's wrong with you? Man, it's my life. My rule. Later on, we were on the house together, and he said he just don't do things what I don't tell you to do. Again, I argued it'll be me to say what to do and what not. He said, okay, then you cook your food yourself. I'm cooking mine. That being said, I was calming myself now, and it is an unknown town, and the only person staying with me was him. So I comforted him by saying, all right, you won. I was just kidding with you and offered him a cigarette. First he denied, but later he thought he has to keep going the whole night, so he accepted. And we were friends now. Then I asked him about the matter in the market, why he behaved so awkward. He said that the fisherman was possessed by the devil. I laughed so hard I couldn't stop. He said, wait for 2 days. Here you will get to know by yourself. Okay, I said. I said that I was reading a joke on my phone and reacted to that and not to his words. That night I got to know his cooking skills, and by my surprise I got to know that he was working in a restaurant in town before joining this company. Things were going fine. We both go to work together during the day, and we used to keep records of the laborers like a site supervisor do, and also collect their ID and stuff, what a supervisor were supposed to do. He was cool with it. I was supposed to go through the blueprint of the structure and locate the orientation of the structure, like a little survey work to be done. And good to go and so on. Things were going fine for 2 to 3 months, until one night I heard a girl crying in the woods. Since we're on top of a hill and the crossroads, one going to the top of another village and the other one going kind of down right beside the site, the house we're living, and another side of the road was a thick forest. Literally can be seen from the mountain forest all along. I then called Ramesh. It was near 11 p.m. and he was listening to some rock music with his awful sounding speaker. It was playing Highway to Hell from AC/DC. I felt like what a fucking coincidence. That guy was always drunk with a local rice beer, which he called juto. That's in his language, and I called him more than thrice. Then he responded with a bottle of juto in his hand, and I took it from him and drank, and he said, "What the hell, you took like you bought it?" I said, "I'm going to need this tonight because I'm hearing a girl crying in the woods." He said even he, too, hear it every day, but today it's too early. He always hear girls scream around 12:30 a.m. to 3 a.m. Now I knew things are going to be really creepy. Remember I said not to talk to that fisherman? I said, yes. That was his daughter dead by getting raped by the local goons, which was also some underground party. I said, really? He said, that ghost girl is out for the night hunting for males. Anyone passing from there would be killed by her because she thinks they're one of those who killed her. Then I knew, of course. I saw a doll beside the fisherman whenever I go to the market, and that fisherman would look to me as if he knows me, like from a long time ago, and wants to settle his unfinished business. Came to my room and slept, and that juto helped me to sleep, and next day passed as usual. And again, during that night around 2 a.m., I could hear the scream this time, and it was louder. And the sound was approaching as it was coming toward us the next minute. It was like screaming outside my house. I was so frightened and helpless and couldn't even call Ramesh since he always loaded at night, but beside a wall was a small hole. The sound was approaching and I could hear the footsteps too. I quickly peeked from that hole to call Ramesh. To my surprise, his door was open. He was not in the room. I didn't even hear his voice or unlocking his door bolts and hinges. I was calming myself and hiding under my blanket. Slowly, the scream was fading away. I was thinking of Ramesh, what had gone wrong with that guy. Must have gone too high with juto and baba shots. The next morning he went missing. From that day the fisherman disappeared too. Incident was reported accordingly to the army authorities and they declared a red zone. Trespassers will be persecuted. I managed to get out of this mess though, but the real mess was Ramesh. The Old Mansion. The old mansion had been abandoned for years, but it stood still proudly at the top of the hill overlooking the town. People would often talk about the strange occurrences that would happen there. Some claimed to have seen lights flickering in the windows at night, while others swore they heard the sound of someone playing the piano on still evenings. It was the talk of the town for a while, but as time passed, people forgot about the old mansion, went on with their lives. However, there was one person who couldn't stop thinking about it. His name was Jack, and he always had been fascinated by the old mansion's history. One day, Jack decided to investigate the old mansion for himself. He made his way up the winding path to the mansion's front door and pushed it open. Inside, he found a vast empty space, covered in dust and cobwebs. The mansion was even bigger than he had imagined, and he couldn't wait to explore it. As he walked around, he noticed that some of the old furniture had been moved. It was as if someone had been living there recently. But that couldn't be possible, could it? Suddenly he heard a sound coming from one of the upstairs rooms. It sounded like footsteps. Jack froze in fear, wondering who or what could be upstairs with him. Slowly he made his way up the creaking staircase and down the long hallway. Finally, he reached the room where the sound had been coming. He slowly pushed the door open and gasped in shock. Inside, he saw an old man sitting at the piano, playing a haunting, beautiful melody. The old man turned to look at Jack, and Jack saw the emptiness in his eyes. It was then that Jack realized that he had just stumbled upon a ghost. The old mansion had been home for the old man, who had been a famous pianist in his time. When he died, his spirit remained, haunting the mansion and playing the piano that he loved so much. Jack left the mansion, shaken but fascinated by what he had seen. From that day onward, he would often visit the old mansion and listen to the ghostly music playing on the old piano. The old mansion may have been abandoned, but it was never truly empty. Wicked Witch. There was a village across the other side of the road where I spent my childhood. It had a small catcha road between two small huts, and it leads to the path that joins the highway to the other part of the city. It was a very long time. I never went there, really, since my childhood, but there was an incident that happened when I was a small kid. I still remember those beautiful sceneries I had across the fields. Memories of nature, quite comforting. I wish if I could go back in time and stay there for a while. So across the field was a hut of an old lady who always shouts at people unnecessarily since she was old, and people would not really do anything, but some would taunt her, so she shouts more. At night, that village reports of hearing an old lady asking for food, weeping and knocking on everybody's door. But it can't cross the road because this side of the road is not a village but a township. It has a proper boundary fence, not even a cattle can pass through it. A few days passed. People now started speaking of that weeping sound of an old lady hungry for food. They hear that sounds disturbing their sleep, and they doubt that an old lady across that field, so they were superstitious that some of the old men suggesting to bring a tantric to know about that weeping lady. Then, next day, the tantric arrived, and without a second thought pointed out that lady's a witch, and something very bad is going to happen to all the villagers in that area. They were afraid and decided to kill that old lady. The tantric went there and pushed the lady to the ground. Everyone gathered there as if they were watching a witch, and next the tantric tied a rope in her neck and dragged her in front of everybody, and no one came forward to speak for that lady. She cried and begged not to be killed, and also said that she knew that witch, but no one would believe her. Then the tantric threw the other half of the rope across a branch on a tree and pulled it, making the old lady to hang and suffocate. And others just threw kerosene on her to burn her alive. Soon the tantric threw the fire on her and burned her alive in front of the whole village, and everybody was staring and celebrating. Gross. They were too sure that they killed the witch. That night, there were no sounds of crying women anymore, and since they were thanking the tantric to get rid of the witch and preparing for a farewell of the tantric, but they would not know that bad was going to start soon. After the farewell party, everybody went to their houses to sleep. Then they hear the tantric was screaming as he was possessed by some evil spirit. Hope it was that lady. As they were out of the house, they again heard the weeping of the lady, but this time was more ferocious than ever. Then nobody went to save the tantric the next day, and tantric was found dead in his room with his skull open in 2 places. They went to see that old lady's house, where they found all the things that a witch would be afraid of. That old lady was protecting their village for so many years, and now the witch has no one to fear and roam freely in their village, killing whomever she likes. Slowly, people started dying, and most were men. The whole village became haunted. That wicked witch took her revenge. Spectral Figure. As I sit here in a dimly lit living room, the only sound echoing through the empty halls is the soft ticking of the antique grandfather clock. Shadows dance along the walls, casting eerie shapes that seem to shift and morph with every passing moment. I can feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me, suffocating and heavy. I try to shake off the feeling of unease that's sort of settled deep within my bones, but it clings to me like a shroud. I tell myself that I'm being foolish, that there's nothing to fear in an empty house, but the hairs on the back of my neck stand up on end nonetheless. Suddenly, a chill sweeps through the room, causing goosebumps to erupt across my skin. I wrap my arms around myself, trying to ward off the cold, but it seems to seep into my very soul. Then I hear it, a faint whisper, barely audible above the rustling of the curtains. My heart pounds in my chest as I strain to make out the words. Sounds like a name, whispered with a mixture of longing and sorrow. Feel a shiver run down my spine as I realize I'm not alone in this house. Panic grips me as I scramble to my feet. My mind races with fear. I stumble through the darkness, the shadows seeming to reach out for me with icy fingers, call out into the void, but my voice is swallowed by the oppressive silence. And then I see her, a spectral figure standing at the end of the hallway, her features obscured by the darkness. She reaches out to me, beckoning with ethereal hands, and I can feel the pull of her presence drawing me closer. I want to run, to escape this nightmare, but I find myself unable to move, mesmerized by her haunting beauty. I take a hesitant step forward, drawn inexorably toward her. As I reach out to touch her, everything fades to black and I'm consumed by the darkness. Shapeshifter. There was a village in some southern part of the city, and it was quite rural. People won't visit there after dawn. People living there had some great stories to tell, so I visited once to clarify if the stories they tell is, whether they're true or just a hoax. So I met a person there named Tarun. He was calm and the silent type of a person. I said to him that I just want to visit this place for a very long time, especially since I heard great rumors about this village from people around the city. Tarun said that you heard it right. That was not a rumor. I said, what? Then why are the people here so scared of? He said when the moon is full, it turns to red, and people could see a wolf man roaming around and killing people who ever want to hunt him, or comes in his way. He said, are you sure of what you're speaking? He said, come near the Purnima, the full moon. Come near it this month, and you'll get to know what we're looking at. I took it. Let's find out the mystery behind it. I left that place that day, since it was going to be dawn, and returned the night before Purnima, full moon. I returned with my bags and belongings, and to my luck, I found a small inn where I could rest for a night or two. That night nothing happened as I was awake all the time in the morning. Nothing mysterious happened. I went to see Tarun and he was not in his house. What a typical person he was, he left his house open and no one was inside. That day the street was also empty and the crows were feeding on dead animals beside the road. A horrifying scene. I checked in my room, took my meals, and the rest of the day just went reading and lying on the bed. As in time of dawn, I heard a howl, like a big adult wolf out for his hunt. I quickly looked out of my room and I saw the inn owner running toward his home. I asked what happened. He said, just remain inside and don't come out of your room. The devil had come. I saw it toward the moon and I was just turning to red like a blood moon. I remembered what Tarun had said, so I was ready to see if it was real. Then I could hear the cows mooing from a nearby farm, and the people came out with whatever weapons they had to hunt that beast. That wolfman killed 2 cows with a single stroke of his hand and dragged his prey before the farmers could even arrive at the spot. I was ready to join with the hunters' group, and I brought an axe from that village that day. It was a traditional axe, sharp and effective. So I was with those farmers looking for that beast and hunting. Some carried 2-barrel guns and shotguns with cartouches, which was good for hunting that beast. I was with them there, and I met a young boy around 30 years, I guess. He was the son of the chairman. He carried a gun, so I felt safe with him. Then we heard men crying from the north as the group split up to smaller groups, fled in all directions. We ran towards them, and we saw 2 men lying on the ground, badly wounded. One's arm was ripped off with blood spilling all over the place, and the other had got a bite on his neck, breathing his last breath. I said, "Oh my God, what is that thing?" The chairman's son replied, "These creatures kept coming for a very long time. They kill their friends and family, and whoever gets killed by his bite turns like that beast. Keeps killing again and again, so the infected must be burned, not buried. To kill that beast infection, it's deadly." Then at the top we heard the howl. The chairman's son and his friends run to it, and I was also with them. There we saw that thing. The boy took a shot from his gun but missed. Everyone fired at that thing, but it was too fast. Now they began tracking his footprints and followed to hunt. Suddenly, a gust of wind passed right by my ears, and I knew that it was near, and I screamed. I saw that beast was running toward me. That boy fired the bullets and hit that beast in his leg. I was like a bait for them. Everyone had guns, but I didn't. Suddenly that beast disappeared and came from behind those men and ripped one's head off from his body. Before anybody could fire, I threw my axe toward it and hit its body, and he was wounded. It went inside his body and it kept hanging there. They fired multiple shots, but that thing wouldn't die. Suddenly that beast jumped toward the chairman's son and bit him. As he was in combat with that beast, his gun fell on the ground, and it fell near me. I took it in my arms, pulled the trigger, aiming right through his eyes to his head. The bullet made a hole in its head, splashed his eyes out and brain open, and he fell 2 feet across the boy's body. The boy was saved, and the remaining men came to see that beast's body, and guess what we saw? The beast was turning out to be a human, as if it shapeshifts. Slowly recognized him. It was Tarun, laying down there. La Llorona. La Llorona, often referred to as the Weeping Woman, is a legendary figure in Latin American folklore. The tale of La Llorona varies across different cultures and regions, but the core story revolves around a woman who's said to have drowned her own children and is now condemned to roam wailing and weeping for an eternity as a tormented spirit. The details of the story can differ, but the common thread is that La Llorona is often depicted as a grieving woman dressed in white, seen near bodies of water, particularly rivers or lakes. Her cries and mournful wails are said to be both eerie and sorrowful, striking fear into those who hear her. This legend has been passed down through generations, serving as a cautionary tale to children. It's often used as a way to discourage them from wandering alone near water bodies or staying out late at night. The tale has been adapted in various forms, including literature, film, music, and other forms of art, making it a significant part of the cultural fabric in many Latin American countries. The story of La Llorona continues to captivate and intrigue people, reflecting the power of folklore to communicate deep emotions and moral lessons across generations.